Thanks to Daniel for that report. And joining us to discuss the fallout from the D.C. shootings is Mike Leon. He's an NTD News contributor and the host of the Can We Please Talk podcast. And Simon Hankinson, Senior Research Fellow on Border and Security and Immigration Center with the Heritage Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us this morning. We're going to explore both aspects of the fallout, both immigration as well as the National Guard deployments. Let's start with immigration. Mike, over to you. Your thoughts on that and some of the fallout that we were just seeing in that last package.
Yeah, good morning to everybody. Obviously my thoughts and prayers are with Sarah's family and pulling for Andrew, obviously, to get through all of this. Look, this is one of those times, Kerry, where I think buzzwords, phrases, pointing the blame. I mean, both administrations can take some of this blame here, obviously, in terms of the refugee program that welcomed in this guy into here, and then obviously the asylum case and the immigration judge that allowed this person to stay earlier this year. So there's a lot of finger pointing to blame, and that normally happens when these type of things happen. And the tragedy is lost in all of this and how we actually make sure that not only our troops are safe, police officers are safe, everybody gets the proper resources and vetting. So there's a lot to digest with all of this. In terms of the immigration aspect of it, the one thing I would say, Kerry, that is kind of counter to what Kristi Noem just said there in the package, and I was speaking with an immigration attorney, a high-profile one yesterday in New Jersey that has handled some of these cases before. The vetting process is very thorough because granting asylum is very, very low. In August of 25, according to track reports, only about 19% of asylum cases were even approved, right? So, and obviously now I know there's a temporary hold right now going on with asylum cases. So it's very tough to get asylum. How he got into this country with the program with respect to Afghan refugees that were helping us fight the Taliban out in Afghanistan, like that is its own thing, and that was years ago. But in terms of him being approved asylum earlier this year, there are other documents, that forensics that need to be submitted to the judge, and all of that stuff is vetted, for lack of a term, during the case, during the trial. So to say that this person wasn't vetted in the Biden administration, yeah, we could blame the program for having him be on U.S. soil and whether or not that program was merited because of what those folks did to help us fight the Taliban in Afghanistan. But now, in terms of him being allowed to stay here, that happened earlier this year. So I really think the finger pointing doesn't help anything. I think the system needs to be fixed overall and change, and we need to figure out how to not get people to radicalize and commit acts of violence like this.
And Simon, your thoughts on asylum and immigration related to this incident, and then we'll broaden it up to talk a little bit more broadly, as Mike's pointing to, just the general problem of radicalization.
Well, on asylum writ large, I think one point that Noam made is worth underlining. Under the Biden administration, there was a policy of catching and releasing people at the border, and they paroled in about 1.5 million people. And both of those programs rest on the premise that all of these people coming in are going to at some point claim asylum. I could go into why that was illegal, and it definitely was counter to U.S. National interests. But that's the fact. So you've got this backlog of whatever 1.5 million people, plus all those that were caught and released that are presumably going to claim asylum at some point. Now, before we release them, we put the tail wag the dog. We let them in first, and then we put them through the asylum process where we supposedly vet them. And always remember, if you ping against a database that has no information in it, you're not really doing a lot of vetting. So we use that word very loosely. If you're vetting someone who comes from Germany, you're going to be able to have, or Japan, pretty accurate data shared by those countries that are members of the visa waiver program. You're going to have at least some background. But if you do it against somebody coming from Afghanistan, unless they are, registered with the U.S. government in some way because they worked for us or we encountered them in the field, you're going to get practically nothing, and the Taliban is not going to share whatever they have. So it is a black box that we're sort of poking into, hoping that it's going to reveal someone's entire history. But the truth is it won't, and it can't. And so we've got these people in now who have to go through the system. And at the end of the process, if they're denied asylum, they have to be sent home again. And that's something we haven't been doing for many years.
You bring up some interesting points. Of course, many of these people came in during the Biden administration. As Mike points out, this person, though, proceeded to gain his access granted in April during Trump's administration. I want to pan out a little bit, though, talk about what Pam Bondi was referring as something that's going to come up a lot more. with the administration on radicalization. With the violence that we've seen just this year since Trump's come in office, these acts of violence from what you might call radicalized individuals were both people who came from overseas as well as U.S. nationals, if you look at the Charlie Kirk incident. So, Mike, what can be done? What should we be talking about as it relates to countering what clearly is a problem of radicalization?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's many forms just in that sentence that you said there, right? The Charlie Kirk incident obviously could be political ideology, which is why I've stressed not only on this program and others, like, let's tone it down. Let's use our words properly here. Things that you learn, like in first grade, second grade, Gary, But then there's the other part of it, right? Which is outside seekers that come here that do want to commit harm, like kind of what Simon said, right? You got some of these folks that do come from some of these countries that it is a black box. And let's be honest, it's a black box for a big reason. We've been involved in conflicts there, and then we've left there. They've asked us for help, and then they didn't like the way we provided the help. And then all of a sudden now you have folks that are coming from these countries that, to Simon's point, the process is broken because we were letting them here, even though they did favors for us and worked inside with the U.S. government, but we didn't actually properly vet them, to use that word loosely again. So there's two types of radicalization. I think the biggest thing for me, Carrie, and it's something, again, that's why my show's called Can We Please Talk, not some other type of incendiary language. I think the rhetoric needs to tone down a little bit. I think also we need to choose our words carefully, and also we need to get the process to be a little bit more rigorous in terms of what it is that we're doing with immigration overall, from soup to nuts, right? In terms of the hardworking citizens that do want to be here that we're sending back right now, versus what the president has said before, which is the criminals, the ones that do want to do harm to our communities, whether it be through drugs or whether it be through like this action of this person right here, killing two National Guards troops. We need to figure out the process to vet these individuals properly across the board, ones coming in, but then also ones that are homegrown here, Carrie. We need to be better with our language across the board, across the political spectrum.
Thank you, Mike. And we are running low on time, but Simon, I do want you to also weigh in on this concept of radicalization and the broken process of asylum seeking.
Radicalization is very, very difficult to fight. I think with domestic terrorists, it comes down to families, it comes down to education, it comes down to ideology. That's pushing on a string. We have to do our best, but you can never completely stamp out far left or even far right ideology. When it comes to foreigners, we have a choice. We can limit at least the risk. We can do much better social media and other kinds of vetting. And we can make the prize of U.S. citizenship a little harder to attain. We're not deporting anybody who's a U.S. citizen. I agree with most of what Mike says, but that was one little slip. We're only deporting people who, under our laws, are not eligible to be here. And so we have to make sure that that prize of U.S. citizenship is always very, very hard to get. And even to be able to stay here as an asylee or refugee or green card holder should be the kind of pinnacle of our immigration system. And we do not want to give that away, which I think we have been for too long.
Well, this tragic incident last Wednesday has certainly brought this directly into focus. Appreciate your comments, Mike Leon, Simon Hankinson. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.